The invoice from my daughter-in-law arrived on a Tuesday. It was itemized, sarcastic, and for $23,000 for watching my own grandchildren. She called it a courtesy bill to show me what I was saving them, so I paid it. I hired a professional nanny agency at their market rate, and I sent her a bill for the difference. My name is Robert. I'm 62, a retired school principal, and for the last 3 years I've watched my 2 grandkids every weekday while their parents work. It was never a question. It was just what you did for family. Until that piece of paper made me see it for what it really was, unpaid labor. And it forced me to ask a question millions of grandparents are quietly asking. When does help become exploitation? It began, like most things do, with a genuine ask for help. My son Ben called me one evening in early September 3 years ago. His voice had that tight, stretched-thin quality new parents get. His daughter, Lily, was 6 months old. His wife, Chloe, was due back at her marketing job in 2 weeks, and their daycare spot had fallen through at the last minute. Could I possibly watch Lily for a few weeks, just until they found something? Of course I could. My wife, Elaine, had passed 2 years before from cancer, and the house was too quiet. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. That first Monday, I showed up at their suburban home at 7:30 in the morning with a bag of old children's books I'd saved from Ben's childhood. Chloe hugged me, her eyes tired but grateful. Ben handed me a list of instructions longer than some lesson plans I'd written. I remember the feeling, holding Lily while they gathered their things for work. It wasn't a burden, it was a purpose. A few weeks turned into a month, then another. The conversation about finding new daycare became less frequent than it just stopped. I didn't bring it up. I loved the time with Lily. When her brother Jack was born a year and a half later, the arrangement simply expanded. My schedule became their infrastructure. I was there every weekday, 7:30 to 5:30. I did the feedings, the naps, the playground trips, the pediatrician appointments when they couldn't get away from work. I used my pension to buy a safer car, to child-proof my house, to stock up on diapers and formula so they wouldn't have to. I considered it an investment in my family. And for a long time, it felt reciprocal. Chloe would bring me a coffee on her way out. Ben would fix my computer when it acted up. They insist I stay for dinner on Fridays. We were a team. I saw the financial pressure they were under, the mortgage, the student loans, the staggering cost of everything. I knew that by watching the kids, I was saving them a fortune. I'd done the math. In our area, full-time infant care runs about $1,800 a month for 2 kids. You're looking at over $3,500. That's $42,000 a year. I never said the number out loud. It felt crass. This wasn't a transaction. This was love. But the shape of the help began to change. The casual Friday dinners became less frequent. The thank you coffees stopped appearing. The requests started extending beyond childcare. Could I wait for the plumber on Tuesday? Could I pick up the grocery order? Could I take Lily to her birthday party on Saturday because they had a friend's wedding? The line between grandpa and full-time, on-call domestic manager began to blur. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday afternoon last October. I had a scheduled follow-up with my cardiologist. Nothing serious, just routine monitoring after a minor scare. I told Ben and Chloe about it a week in advance. That morning, as I was getting the kids ready to come to my house, Chloe came into the kitchen already on a work call. She muted her phone. "Robert, I completely forgot. I have a huge client presentation downtown today. It's running late. Can you just keep them here until I'm back? It'll just be a couple extra hours." I mentioned my appointment. She sighed, a short, frustrated sound. "Dad, it's just a checkup. Can't you reschedule? This is really important for me." I looked at Ben. He was scrolling through his phone, pretending not to hear. I rescheduled the appointment. That night, for the first time, I felt a simmering resentment. It wasn't about the hours. It was about the assumption, the expectation that my time, my health, was the flexible variable. Their careers, their commitments were solid, immovable. My needs were the thing that could be bent. I started noticing things I'd chosen to ignore. The way conversations would pivot to their stress, their finances, subtly reinforcing how vital my free help was to their stability. The way any mention of my own plans was met with a slight, anxious silence. I saw the statistics I used to read about as an educator playing out in my own living room. Nearly 40% of grandparents provide regular childcare. 1 in 5 of them leave the workforce to do it. We are the invisible, unpaid backbone of the economy, and the cost is quietly shifted onto our time, our savings, our retirement. The tension never erupted into a fight. It just hardened like cold concrete. Our interactions became more logistical, less personal. I was a service being utilized, and I felt deeply and silently that I was losing my son. He was caught in the middle, and his solution was to avoid the middle altogether. He became quieter, more distant, always buried in his screen when we exchanged the kids. Then 3 weeks ago it happened. It was a normal Thursday. The kids and I had spent the day at the Science Museum. We got back to my place around 4, tired and happy. In my mailbox among the bills and catalogs was a crisp, business-sized envelope addressed to me in Chloe's precise handwriting. No stamp. She dropped it off. I opened it at the kitchen table while Jack napped and Lily colored. It was a single sheet of paper. At the top it said, "Invoice." Not a note, an invoice. It was laid out in columns: date, service description, hours, market rate, subtotal. It itemized every day of the previous month. Childcare 7.5 hours, childcare 9 hours, transportation to gymnastics, meal preparation. The market rate column listed $25 an hour for childcare, $20 for driving. At the bottom, a calculated total, $4,870 for the month. Beneath the total, she had written a note. "Robert thought you should see what your help is really worth to us. This is what we're saving every month because of you. Maybe now you'll understand why we're so stressed about money all the time. Consider this a courtesy. Chloe." I read it 3 times. The sarcasm dripped off the page. The courtesy. The implication that my free labor was somehow the cause of their financial stress, rather the thing preventing it from being catastrophic. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a conversation. It was a performative, passive-aggressive bullet point in an argument I didn't know we were having. I felt my face get hot, then cold. I looked at Lily, concentrating on her drawing, her tongue poking out the corner of her mouth just like Ben's used to. I looked at the paper in my hands. This was how she saw me, as a line item, a cost avoided, a value quantified only by what she didn't have to pay. I didn't say a word when Ben came to pick them up that evening. I just handed him the kids' bags. He looked at my face and knew something was wrong. "You okay, Dad?" I just nodded and closed the door. I sat at my kitchen table until well past midnight, that invoice staring back at me. The anger settled into something colder, clearer. She wanted to make this about money. She wanted to give me a courtesy look at the market rate. Fine. I opened my laptop. I found the most reputable, highest-rated nanny agency in the city. I called them the next morning during their business hours. I explained the situation. 2 children full-time need immediate coverage. I asked for their comprehensive rate. The woman on the phone was professional, efficient. For 2 children with the required experience and background checks, their rate was $38 an hour. For a 40-hour week, that came to $6,080 a month. I thanked her. I hung up. I opened a fresh spreadsheet. I am nothing if not thorough. I created a new invoice. Service description, professional nanny services, month of April, market rate. I entered the agency's number, $6,080. Below it, I added a line item, less, grandparent services as previously valued by client. I entered Chloe's number, $4,870. I calculated the difference, $1,210. At the bottom, I wrote a note of my own. "Chloe, per your recent invoice and market analysis, you have been underpaying for services rendered. Enclosed is the balance due for the month of April. Professional childcare will commence Monday. Payment is due upon receipt." I printed it, I put it in an envelope, and I drove to their house. I didn't ring the bell. It was a Saturday morning just after 9. I slid the envelope into the mail slot in their front door, heard it hit the floor inside. Then I got back in my car and drove away. My hands were steady on the wheel. I'd spent a lifetime maintaining order in chaotic situations. This was just another one. The silence lasted exactly 37 hours. My phone remained dead. No calls, no texts. It was the quietest weekend I'd had in 3 years. I didn't know if they were furious, panicking, or simply in denial. But I knew the nanny agency opened at 8 a.m. on Monday. I had already given them a retainer and signed a temporary contract. The clock was running. At 7:55 Monday morning, my phone finally rang. It was Ben. His voice was a low, tense wire. "Dad, what is this? What did you do?" I kept my voice calm, the principal's voice. "I reviewed the market rate, as suggested by Chloe's invoice. It appears you've been underpaying. I've arranged for professional coverage starting today. A woman named Marisol will be at your house at 8:30. There was a long silence. I could hear Chloe talking sharply in the background. "You hired a asterisk stranger," Ben finally said, disbelief flattening his words. "Without talking to us, to watch our kids." "You sent me an invoice without talking to me, Ben," I said. "We're just following the new protocol, the financial one your wife established." "This isn't funny," he shouted, and I heard the fear underneath the anger. The fear of a $300 a day bill they couldn't pay. The fear of a system they'd taken for granted suddenly shutting down. "You can't just do this." "The bill for last month's difference is $1,210, I said mechanically. "You can mail a check. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to confirm Marisol's arrival." I ended the call. I immediately felt sick, but I didn't call back. At 8:29, I parked down the street from their house. I saw a clean, late-model sedan pull into their driveway. A woman in her 40s, dressed in practical slacks and a sweater, got out with a tote bag. "Marisol." She rang the bell. The door opened. I saw Ben's silhouette. The conversation was brief. He was shaking his head. She handed him a folder, likely the agency contract and her credentials. He took it, stepped back. She walked inside. The door closed. I sat there for 20 minutes. No one came out. The house didn't explode. Life in its new, expensive, professional form had begun. I drove home. The emptiness of my house, which I had longed for on stressful days, now felt vast and accusing. The first text from Chloe arrived at 10:15. It was a photo. A picture of Jack, my 2-year-old grandson, crying, red-faced, reaching for the door. The caption read, "He's been asking for Grandpa for an hour. This is what you wanted." I didn't respond. Deleting it felt cruel. Acknowledging it felt like surrender. I just put the phone face down, but the image was seared into my mind. By Wednesday, the financial reality began to bite. Ben called again, his tone stripped of anger, just raw stress. "Dad, we can't. This agency rate is impossible. It's more than our mortgage. You have to call it off." "I'm not the client, Ben," I said. "You are. You need to discuss terms with the agency directly, or you can make other arrangements." "Other arrangements? It's a Tuesday. We have jobs." The helplessness in his voice was a physical ache in my chest. This was my son. I was engineering his crisis, but I remembered the doctor's appointment I'd canceled. I remembered the sarcastic courtesy invoice. The ache hardened. "Then I suggest you pay Marisol directly and seek reimbursement from your dependent care FSA," I said, quoting a line from the agency's FAQ. I was hiding behind procedure. It was the only way to get through the conversation. On Thursday, the approach changed. It was Chloe who called. Her voice was sweet, conciliatory, all the sarcasm drained away. "Robert, hi. Listen, I think we got off on the wrong foot. That invoice, it was a joke. A really stupid, tone-deaf joke. I'm so sorry. Can we please just reset? Come over for dinner tonight. Let's talk." It was a complete reversal. The tactical retreat. I knew it was because they'd seen the first week's projected cost from the agency. I agreed to dinner, not because I believed her, but because I wanted to see my grandkids. Walking into their house that evening was like entering a museum of our former life. The toys were in the same bins, the high chair was in its place, but the energy was all wrong. Tense, performative. Lily ran to me, hugged my legs. "Grandpa, you came back." That sentence nearly broke me. Dinner was polite and strained. Chloe heaped praise on Marisol, how knowledgeable she was, while subtly emphasizing how confused the kids were. Ben was quiet, pushing food around his plate. After the kids were in bed, we sat in the living room. The performance began. Chloe laid out a spreadsheet on her laptop. It was their monthly budget. She walked me through it line by line. The mortgage, the car payments, the student loans, the utilities. Then she input the nanny agency cost. The bottom line went bright red, negative $2,000 a month. "We can't sustain this for 2 weeks, let alone indefinitely," she said, her eyes wide with manufactured distress. "We'll lose the house." She closed the laptop. "So we were thinking, what if we just formalize things with you? We pay you. Not the agency rate, of course, we can't afford that, but something. A token. $200 a week. That's more than fair for family, right? And everything goes back to normal." I looked at her, then at Ben. $200 a week, I repeated. "For 50 hours of care, that's $4 an hour." "It's a gesture, Robert," she said, smiling tightly. "A way to show we value you, to make it official." They were offering me less than minimum wage to buy back the old arrangement, to put a cheap coat of paint on the exploitation and call it a job. The insult was so profound, it was almost impressive. "Chloe," I said slowly, "you valued my labor at $25 an hour when you sent me that invoice. The market says it's 38. You're now offering 4. Which number is the real one?" The smile vanished. "We're trying to be reasonable here. We're family. You're supposed to want to help us." "I have helped you," I said, my voice finally rising. "For 3 years. I've helped you to the tune of over $150,000 in avoided childcare costs. I have postponed medical appointments. I have spent my retirement savings. What I want is not to be presented with a sarcastic bill and then offered pennies to pretend it never happened." Ben finally spoke, his voice an exhausted groan. "Dad, please just stop. Stop with the calculations. Can't you just be our dad?" The question hung in the air. That was the core of it. To be their dad, their grandpa, meant to be the flexible, unlimited, unpaid resource. To say no to being exploited was, in their eyes, to reject being family. "I am being your dad," I said, standing up. "And part of that is showing you that your actions have consequences. You don't get to put a price tag on my love and then be shocked when I use the register. The agency is in place for the rest of the month. That's the arrangement. Good night." I left them sitting in the silent living room. As I drove home, the anger was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow grief. I had drawn a line in the sand, and my family was on the other side of it. The next phase was the siege. The texts stopped. The calls stopped. Instead, the pressure came from the periphery. My sister, Linda, called. "Ben is heartbroken, Robert. He says you're holding his children hostage over money." An old friend from the school district emailed, saying he'd heard I was causing my son's family terrible financial strain. Chloe had clearly been working the phones, crafting a narrative of a greedy grandfather punishing his struggling children. Then came the first legal shot across the bow. A week later, an email arrived from an attorney named David Fisher. The subject line: "Formal inquiry regarding childcare services." The email was carefully worded. It stated that Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin Wright were exploring their options regarding the unilateral and contractual engagement of third-party childcare services by a grandparent, and were seeking clarity on my legal authority to incur such expenses on their behalf. It asked for copies of all signed agreements with the nanny agency and suggested that, if I did not have explicit parental consent, I might be held financially responsible for the entire cost. It was a bluff, A smart one, but a bluff. I knew from my own rushed research after the invoice arrived that grandparents have virtually no legal standing to sue for childcare payment. But the reverse was also true. Without a formal power of attorney, you can't usually bind someone else to a contract for their children. I had signed the agency contract as the client, paying the retainer myself. I was on the hook for Marisol's fees, not them. But the intent of the email wasn't legal victory. It was intimidation. It was to scare me with the prospect of a $38 an hour liability with no end in sight, to make me buckle. I didn't buckle. I forwarded the email to the director of the nanny agency, a no-nonsense woman named Anya. I called her. "Does this change anything?" I asked. Anya laughed, a short, dry sound. "Mr. Wright, we vet our clients. You paid the retainer. The parents have accepted the caregiver into their home and have allowed her to provide services for over a week. In the eyes of our contract, and frankly in any small claims court, that constitutes implied consent. Their attorney is fishing. Do you want to cancel?" I thought of Lily's face, of Jack's tears in the photo. I thought of the $4 an hour offer. "No," I said, "do not cancel." "Good," she said. "Then our lawyers will handle the reply. You won't be hearing from Mr. Fisher again." She was right. The legal threat evaporated, but its failure triggered the next, more desperate escalation. It moved from the theoretical to the physical. The following Monday, I came home from the grocery store to find Ben's car in my driveway. He was sitting on my front porch steps, head in his hands. He looked up as I approached. He hadn't shaved. He looked 10 years older. "I can't do this, Dad," he said, his voice cracking. "Chloe, she's talking about leaving, about taking the kids and moving in with her parents in Ohio if we go bankrupt. She says you've chosen money over family. She says you've forced her hand." This was new. This was the nuclear option, using access to my grandchildren as the ultimate bargaining chip. My breath caught. This was the fear that had kept me silent for 3 years. I sat down next to him on the step. The concrete was cold. "Ben," I said quietly, "look at me. Did you ever think for 1 second about what that invoice would feel like to me after everything I've done?" He stared at his shoes. "She said it would be a wake-up call, to show you how much we appreciate you." "By giving me a bill?" I asked, not needing an answer. "Son, you are being financially drained by a problem I created, I get that. But for 3 years I was being drained too. My time, my savings, my retirement, my health. The only difference is no one ever sent me an invoice for it. My compensation was supposed to be your gratitude, and when that dried up, all I was left with was the work." He was crying now, silent tears of frustration and exhaustion. "I don't know what to do. I'm losing everything." "You're not," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "You're being asked to pay a real cost for a real service for the first time. That's all. Welcome to adulthood. It's expensive." "I can't pay it," he shouted, standing up. "Don't you get it? The numbers don't work. We will lose our house." "Then you need to find another solution," I said, standing to face him. "A cheaper daycare, a nanny share, a shift in your work schedules. What you don't get to do is declare that my retirement must be the solution to your math problem. Not anymore." He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and helplessness. "Who are you?" he whispered. "I'm the same man who showed up every day for 3 years," I said. "You're just seeing the full price tag for the first time." He left without another word. That night I received the final, definitive message. Not a text, not an email. It was a formal, certified letter. It was from Chloe's father, a man I'd met only a handful of times. It was typed on plain paper, but the language was brutal. It accused me of elder manipulation and financial coercion. It said I was weaponizing my grandchildren to punish my son for marrying his daughter. It concluded with a threat. If I did not immediately terminate the nanny contract and resume normal grandparental duties, the family would pursue a formal restraining order based on harassment and the intentional infliction of emotional distress upon the children, citing the photo of Jack crying as evidence. I read the letter under the kitchen light, my heart pounding in my ears. A restraining order. They were threatening to legally bar me from my own grandchildren. The line had not just been crossed, it had been obliterated. I went to my desk. I took out a fresh piece of paper. I started writing down everything just as I had the night of the 2 a.m. door knocking in the original story. The date of the first ask, the canceled cardiology appointment, the sarcastic invoice, the nanny agency contract number, Ben's visit, now this letter. I documented it all with times, dates, and quotes. Because I knew now with cold certainty that this was no longer a family disagreement. It was a war, and the next move would determine whether I ever saw Lily and Jack again. I picked up the phone. It was time to call a lawyer. I called Susan Park. She was the attorney who had helped me settle Elaine's estate. She listened without interruption for 20 minutes as I laid out the entire timeline, from the first day of babysitting to the threatening letter from Chloe's father. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Robert, you've been keeping a ledger of the wrong thing." I didn't understand. I have dates, times, copies of everything. "You've documented the grievances," she said, "but the leverage isn't in how you've been wronged. It's in what you've provided. You said you bought a car. A safer SUV, yes, last year. And you child-proofed your home. Extensively, out of my own pocket. And the diapers, formula, toys, activities. All me. I never asked for reimbursement. I considered it my contribution." I heard her typing. "That's not a contribution, Robert. In a dispute over caregiving expectations, that's evidence of a pattern of voluntary provision. It actually weakens any claim you might have for back pay, but it's also a sword. They are threatening a restraining order based on you being a destabilizing influence. Meanwhile, you've been the primary stabilizing force for 3 years. A judge will look at that and see a family in turmoil, but not because of you. You need to stop reacting and start defining the battlefield." Her advice was surgical. First, she drafted a response to Chloe's father's letter. It was a single paragraph stating that any further communication should be directed to her office and that unfounded legal threats would be taken seriously. Second, she told me to formally request, via text and email, the return of all items I had purchased for the children that were in their home. The car seats, the high chair, the stroller, the boxes of clothes and toys. "It's not about the stuff," Susan said. "It's about forcing an acknowledgement of the material support. It makes the support visible, and its withdrawal tangible." I sent the messages. The response was instantaneous and volcanic. Chloe called, screaming so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "You want your things back. You're going to take the car seats out of my car. What is wrong with you? You're going to leave my children unsafe to prove a point." I repeated the line Susan gave me. "I am simply reclaiming my property. You are, of course, free to purchase replacements at any time." She hung up. An hour later, Ben was in my driveway again. This time, he wasn't crying. He was empty. He opened the trunk of his car. It was filled with the items I'd requested, dumped in haphazardly. He didn't look at me as he carried the 2 convertible car seats to my porch and set them down. "Happy?" he said, his voice flat. "No, Ben, I'm not happy." "Then why are you doing this? Why are you tearing our lives apart?" "Because you sent me a bill, son," I finally shouted, the composure breaking. "You sent me a bill and then threatened to take my grandchildren away when I used your own math. Do you have any idea how that feels?" He flinched but didn't back down. "We're drowning, Dad. The agency sent us the first week's invoice. It's over $6,000. We don't have it. We're going to have to pull Lily out of preschool. We're going to have to sell Chloe's car. You've won. Are you satisfied now?" He got back in his car and left. I stood on my porch looking at the pile of kid stuff. It looked like the debris field of a life that had exploded. I felt sick, but I also knew he hadn't answered the question. The next day, Susan called with a discovery. She had done a routine check on the family's civil court filings, something she always did when threats were made. She found nothing about restraining orders, but she found something else. "Robert, did you know your son and his wife filed for bankruptcy 2 years ago? Chapter 13. They're on a repayment plan." I was stunned. No, they never said a word. It's public record. Their plan payment is about $2,000 a month for 5 years. It explains why their budget is so tight. It also means, she said, her tone shifting, that any new significant debt, like tens of thousands in nanny fees, could trigger a dismissal of their bankruptcy. They'd lose the court's protection from their creditors. Everything would come due. The world tilted. They hadn't just been living paycheck to paycheck. They were in a legal and financial stranglehold, and I had just stepped on the rope. Chloe's invoice wasn't just sarcasm. It was a panic lashing out from people who were truly, legally trapped. But they had also hidden this from me for years, while accepting my full-time labor and financial support. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice hollow. "You have a choice," Susan said. "You can use this as leverage. Their threat to seek a restraining order is laughable given their dependent reliance on you. You could force a settlement, a formal paid childcare agreement at a reduced rate, but one that acknowledges your contribution. Or you can fold, terminate the nanny contract, resume care, and accept that you will be the unpaid safety net for a family that is, frankly, insolvent." I told her I needed to think. I hung up and stared out the window. The moral high ground had just turned into a muddy, complicated swamp. I wasn't just fighting for respect. I was potentially holding the pins of their financial destruction in my hand. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I drove to their house unannounced. I saw Marisol's car was gone. It was after 6. I knocked. Ben answered. He looked exhausted but not surprised. "Come to repo the crib," he said without humor. "I need to talk to you both, right now." We sat in the same living room. Chloe stayed standing, arms crossed. I cut to the chase. "Why didn't you tell me about the bankruptcy?" The color drained from Ben's face. Chloe's defiant posture stiffened. "That's none of your business," she said. "It became my business when you sent me an invoice for $4,800 a month," I shot back. "When you asked me to work for free while you were in a court-ordered repayment plan. You were using my labor to pay off your debts and didn't have the decency to tell me the truth about why you needed it so badly." Ben put his head in his hands. "It was shameful, Dad. We messed up. Credit cards, a car we couldn't afford. We were trying to fix it ourselves." "And my free childcare was part of the fix," I said, the final piece clicking into place. "I wasn't just helping. I was a necessary, unpaid component of your debt repayment strategy. That's why the invoice felt so violent. You weren't showing me what I was saving you. You were showing me the cost of replacing a vital, unpaid component of your financial survival plan." Chloe didn't deny it. She just looked at me with hardened eyes. "So what now? You know our secret. Are you going to hold that over us too?" I ignored her, looking at my son. "Ben, the nanny contract will bankrupt you. Literally, it will break your Chapter 13. I don't want that, but I cannot and will not go back to the way things were. So here is the only offer on the table. I will terminate the agency contract. I will resume watching Lily and Jack 3 days a week. The other 2 days you will have to figure out, swap schedules, find a cheaper sitter, something, and you will pay me, not $4 an hour, 15. For the hours I work. It's less than half the market rate, but it's a real wage, and we sign a simple month-to-month agreement." Chloe laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "15 an hour, we can't afford that either. The bankruptcy payment takes it all." "Then you need to adjust your bankruptcy budget with the court," I said, my voice cold. "Because the free ride is over. This is the cost. This is the real market rate for your father's labor, discounted by more than half out of love. Take it or leave it." Ben looked at Chloe, a silent, desperate communication passing between them. "We need to talk," Ben said to her. "Alone." I waited on the porch. The night air was chilly. I could hear the raised voices inside, muffled but intense. After 10 minutes, Ben came out alone. He leaned against the railing, not looking at me. "She's calling her dad," he said quietly. "He's talking about helping with the money for the nanny, to keep us from agreeing to this. He says you're extorting us." Of course, the threat of outside rescue, the cavalry arriving to keep the exploitative system intact. "What do you want, Ben?" I asked, exhausted. "Do you want to be indebted to your in-laws instead? Do you want to prove to your wife that her father can solve the problem your father created?" "I want my kids to have a grandfather," he burst out. "Not a contractor. I want to come over on a Sunday and watch a game and not have to think about whether I've paid you for the last week of babysitting. I want it to be normal again." "It was never normal," I said, my own voice breaking. "It was me setting myself on fire to keep you warm and you complaining that the light was too bright. The invoice just showed me the burn scars. This is the new normal, one where we see each other clearly." He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I'll talk to the bankruptcy trustee about adjusting the budget. We'll try the 2 days a week thing, for now." It wasn't acceptance, it was surrender, a tactical retreat under financial duress, but it was a start. I drove home feeling like I'd just negotiated a peace treaty in a war where I'd bombed my own territory. I called the agency the next morning and terminated the contract, paying a hefty cancellation fee. I told them Marisol was exceptional and it was no reflection on her. I texted Ben and Chloe the simple, one-page agreement Susan had drawn up. It outlined the hours, the rate, the payment schedule. It included a clause that either party could terminate with 2 weeks' notice. Chloe never signed it, but the next Monday at 7:30, Ben dropped the kids off at my house. He handed me an envelope. Inside was $225 in cash, for 15 hours at $15 an hour. He didn't meet my eyes. "For last week," he mumbled. It was the most uncomfortable transaction of my life, but I took the money. I said, "Thank you." For 2 weeks, this was the new rhythm. The silence between us was thick and heavy. The kids felt it. Lily asked, "Daddy mad at you, Grandpa?" I didn't know how to answer. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, the second bomb dropped. I was cleaning up after lunch when my doorbell rang. It was a woman in her 50s, well-dressed, with a serious, kind face. She introduced herself as Sarah Jennings from the Department of Children and Family Services. My blood ran cold. "Is everything okay with the kids?" "They're fine," she said quickly. "May I come in? I'm here regarding a complaint we received. It's a routine follow-up." She sat at my kitchen table. She explained that they had received an anonymous report expressing concern about the children's care. Specifically, it alleged that the children were being shuffled between multiple unfamiliar caregivers in a short period, causing emotional distress, and that there was a contentious family dispute impacting their stability. My heart hammered against my ribs, the photo of Jack crying, the mention of multiple caregivers, me, then Marisol, then back to me, the contentious dispute. It was a masterpiece of strategic reporting, using just enough truth to trigger an investigation. I told her everything. The 3 years of care, the invoice, the nanny agency, the bankruptcy, the new paid arrangement. I showed her the child-proofing, the stocked pantry, the toys, the safety gates. I showed her the signed agency contract and the cancellation. I showed her the one-page agreement and the envelope of cash from Ben. I held nothing back. She took notes, her expression unreadable. At the end, she asked for Ben and Chloe's contact information. "We'll need to speak with them and likely see the children in their home as well," she said. "It's protocol." After she left, I sat in stunned silence. Then the rage came, clean and white-hot. This was the escalation I hadn't anticipated. They hadn't just threatened a restraining order. They had called Child Protective Services. They had brought the state into my living room and implied I was a risk to my grandchildren. I didn't call Ben. I didn't call Susan. I knew what this was. This was the final nuclear move to regain total control, to either force me back into uncompensated, silent service, or to burn the entire relationship to the ground so they could paint me as the villain and walk away. I had tried reason. I had tried compromise. I had tried a fair wage. And in return, they had painted a target on my back for the government to see. I went to my desk. I opened the spiral notebook. I started a new page. At the top, I wrote a single word: war. And I began to list in meticulous detail every asset, every piece of leverage, every truth I had left to tell. It was no longer about money. It was no longer about respect. It was about survival, and I was done playing defense. I didn't wait for the caseworker's report. I called Susan and told her about the visit. Her response was immediate. "We file a counter-complaint now." We didn't allege abuse or neglect. We filed a formal report of our own with the same department, outlining what we called a pattern of financial exploitation and coercive control of an elderly parent. We attached the sarcastic invoice, the $4 an hour offer, the threatening letter from Chloe's father, and the bankruptcy filing. We argued that the original anonymous complaint was a retaliatory act designed to weaponize the state to force the continuation of unpaid labor. Susan sent it that afternoon. 2 days later, Sarah Jennings, the caseworker, called me. Her tone was different, colder, more formal. "Mr. Wright, we've received your submission. We will be accelerating our investigation. We'll need to interview you again, and we'll be speaking with your son and daughter-in-law separately tomorrow." The battle had been joined on the field they chose, and for the first time, I saw a crack in their unity. Ben called me that night. He was whispering as if hiding. "Dad, what did you do? The caseworker just called. She said you filed a report against us for asterisk exploitation." "I responded to the one filed against me, Ben," I said, "which you either made or allowed to be made. This is what happens when you call in the government. They look at everyone." "We didn't call them," he said, and I heard real panic. "I swear to God, we didn't. It must have been Chloe's dad. He said he knew people. He said he'd make you back down." So it was the father-in-law, the external agitator. Ben was telling the truth. I could hear it in his voice. He was terrified. A DCFS investigation combined with their bankruptcy could be a nightmare for their standing as parents. It could affect everything. "Then you need to get control of your allies, Ben," I said, "because the next move is yours. You can tell the caseworker the truth, that this was a malicious, false report made by a disgruntled third party to gain leverage in a financial dispute. Or you can double down and see where it leads." He was silent for a long time. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth," I said. "That's all I've ever wanted." The joint meeting with the caseworker happened in a small, beige conference room at the DCFS office. Ben and Chloe were already there when I arrived with Susan. They looked like they hadn't slept. Sarah Jennings sat at the head of the table. She laid out the process. She had interviewed the children at their preschool. She had reviewed the nanny agency contract, the financial records, the texts. Then she looked at Ben and Chloe, who made the initial anonymous report. Chloe looked at the table. Ben cleared his throat. "We believe it was my father-in-law. We did not authorize it. We were upset, but we would never do that." Sarah made a note, and the invoice, she slid a copy toward them. Chloe flushed. "It was a joke, a bad one." "A joke you followed with an offer of $4 an hour after he hired professional care," Sarah said, reading from her notes. "And you are in an active Chapter 13 bankruptcy, correct?" They both nodded, mortified. Sarah turned to me. "Mr. Wright, you have provided near full-time care for 3 years without compensation, spending significant portions of your retirement savings to do so. Is that accurate?" "Yes," I said. She closed her folder. "Here is my assessment. This is not a child welfare issue. This is a severe family dispute with significant financial underpinnings. The children are well cared for, loved, and safe in both homes. The anonymous report appears retaliatory and unfounded. However, she looked at Ben and Chloe. The pattern of expecting and demanding uncompensated labor from a retiree, to the point of threatening his access to his grandchildren when he pushed back, is concerning. It is a form of elder financial abuse. Do you understand that? Chloe's head shot up. Abuse, we're not abusing him. Exploitation doesn't only mean stealing from a dementia patient, Sarah said calmly. It can mean systematically using up the time, resources, and health of an older family member because you assume they have nothing better to do. The state has a unit for this. I am required to forward my notes to them. The color left Chloe's face. Ben looked like he might be sick. The threat was no longer about losing childcare. It was about being labeled as perpetrators of elder abuse. The stigma, the potential for court-mandated classes, the permanent mark on their record. We'll drop everything, Ben blurted out. The money, the everything. We just want this to go away. Sarah looked at me, Mr. Wright. I looked at my son, at the sheer terror in his eyes. I thought of the statistic I'd read. 1 in 5 grandparent caregivers leaves the workforce. I thought of the $150,000. I thought of the word abuse hanging in the air. I don't want to press charges, I said slowly. I never did. I wanted the work to be seen, to be valued. I want a signed, fair agreement, and I want the poison out of this family. Sarah nodded. Then I will close my case as unfounded. I will recommend no further action, provided you all sign a family safety plan drafted by a mediator. My role ends today. What you do next is up to you. We left the office in silence. In the parking lot, Susan handed Ben a card for a family mediator she trusted. Call him, she said, today. Then she left. The three of us stood there, surrounded by the dusty cars and the flat, bureaucratic light. The fight had been drained out of us, replaced by a hollow, shared shame. I'm sorry, Dad, Ben said, his voice thick, for all of it. Chloe didn't apologize, but she didn't argue either. She just said, we'll call the mediator. The mediation session was held the following week. It was brutal, awkward, and profoundly necessary. We sat in a neutral office with a calm man named David who made us each state what we wanted without interruption. I said I wanted a clear, paid agreement and guaranteed, conflict-free access to my grandchildren. Ben said he wanted his family back. Chloe said she wanted financial security. David helped us draft a new agreement. It was more detailed than my one-page sheet. I would provide childcare 3 days a week, from 8 to 5. The rate would be $18 an hour, a number the mediator derived by splitting the difference between my old free labor and the professional agency rate. They would pay me weekly, via electronic transfer, with a receipt. We would have a monthly review meeting, and we would all attend 4 sessions of family counseling. We all signed it. It felt less like a treaty and more like a surrender document, but it was done. The first payment hit my bank account the next Friday, $1,080. I stared at the notification on my phone. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like a transaction. But maybe, I thought, that was the point. Love had been expected to do the work of money for too long. Now money would do its own work and maybe love could breathe again. The change didn't happen overnight. The first month was stiff, polite, and painfully transactional. But a strange thing began to happen. Because my time was now quantified and paid for, it became bounded. At 5 o'clock, my work day ended. I was no longer on call for evenings and weekends. I started saying no to extra requests, and because I was now an employee with a contract, they accepted it without argument. And with the boundaries firm, space opened up for something else. Ben started coming over on Sundays again, just to watch a game. Without the unspoken pressure of the childcare debt hanging over us, we could just be father and son. Chloe was colder, more distant, but she was civil. The counseling sessions were agonizing, but they forced us to say things we'd buried for years. Then 6 months after the mediation came the surprising detail, the thing I never saw coming. It was a Tuesday, my day off. Ben asked to meet me for lunch. He looked nervous. We sat in a booth at a diner, and after the coffee was poured, he slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It was a printout of an email from Chloe's father. I started to push it away. "I don't want to read it, Ben." "Just read it," he said. I sighed and opened it. It was a long, rambling email, but the crux was in the middle. He was writing to tell Ben that he and Chloe's mother could no longer contribute to the grandparent bailout fund, as he called it. He cited his own rising medical costs, but then he wrote a line that made my breath catch. "I told Chloe years ago that grandparents are supposed to help. That's what we did for her." I never expected her to turn it into a business arrangement, but I also never thought she'd let it get to the point of government involvement. "Maybe your father was right to push back. We're stepping away." I looked up at Ben. "What is this?" "Chloe showed it to me last night," Ben said. "She'd been hiding it for a week. Her dad wasn't just meddling. He was funding their side of the war. He'd been sending them $1,000 a month to help with the nanny costs to try and outlast you. That's how they were affording it. This email is him cutting them off. For good." The final piece, the external financial prop that had allowed them to resist for so long, was gone. They were now truly on their own. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because I wanted you to know the whole truth," Ben said. "And because we can't afford the $18 an hour anymore. Not without his help. We need to renegotiate." I felt the old defensiveness rise, but I looked at my son's face. He wasn't demanding. He was asking. For the first time, he was coming to me with a problem, not an expectation. "What are you proposing?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "What if we went a 15? And what if we stopped the electronic transfers? What if instead we put that $15 an hour into a college savings account for Lily and Jack? In your name, so you control it. You're still paid. The work is still valued, but the money goes to their future, not your checking account." I sat back, stunned. It was a profound pivot. It acknowledged the value of the labor, but reinvested it directly into the grandchildren. It transformed the transaction from a wage into a legacy. "Did you come up with this?" I asked. He shook his head. "Chloe did." That was the real surprise, not the money, the source of the idea. It was an apology in financial code, a way to say the value of my work should compound for the kids, not just offset their monthly bills. I agreed. We amended the contract. The payments stopped coming to me. Every Friday, I get a statement showing the deposit into the 529 plan. The balance is already over $5,000. It's the first real financial security those kids have ever had. Last weekend, I was rocking Jack to sleep in the nursery at their house. Chloe came in and sat in the glider next to me. We didn't speak for a while. Then she said, "The caseworker was right, you know, about the exploitation. I didn't see it. I just saw my dad struggling to help me, and I thought that's just what parents do. I thought your no meant you loved us less than he loved me." I didn't know what to say, so I just said, "I love them, and I love Ben. That's never changed." "I know," she said, and for the first time in years, I believed she did. The war is over. The peace is fragile, and it's built on paperwork and counseling receipts and college savings accounts. But it's a peace. I see my grandchildren. My son looks me in the eye again. And every time I get that automated deposit notice for the kids' future, I remember the invoice that started it all. The one that mistook a lifetime of love for a line item. So what was the invoice really for? It wasn't for the hours or the driving or the meals. It was a bill for the assumption that love should be limitless, quantifiable, and free. That a grandparent's time is a natural resource to be tapped, not a finite reserve that needs replenishing too. We have built an entire economy on that assumption. 39% of grandparents provide regular care. They save families an average of $2,400 per child every year. 1 in 5 leave the workforce to do it. We call it help. We rarely call it work. And because it's wrapped in love, we've decided it shouldn't come with a price tag, But everything has a cost. The question is, who pays it? In my case, the cost was my retirement savings, my postponed health, and 3 years of my quiet retirement. The cost for Ben and Chloe was nearly their marriage, their financial stability, and their relationship with me. We were all paying, we just weren't accounting for it. The invoice, as cruel as it was, forced the accounting. I learned that a boundary is not a wall. It's a load-bearing wall. It defines the structure so the whole thing doesn't collapse. Saying, I can do 3 days, not 5, isn't rejection. It's sustainability. Putting a dollar value on my labor wasn't reducing love to a transaction. It was preventing resentment from becoming the currency of our relationship. The system is broken. We are the only developed country without a national paid family leave policy. Childcare costs more than college tuition in most states. So we patch the holes with grandparents and then act surprised when the patch wears thin and the people underneath get tired. But here's what I know now, sitting in the quiet of my house after dropping the kids off, looking at the statement for their college fund. Love doesn't mean saying yes to everything. Sometimes, love means saying this much and no more so that you can say yes again tomorrow. It means knowing the difference between being needed and being used, between support and subsidy. My grandson Jack has a new word. He says mine. He says it about his toy trucks, his blanket, his cup. We're teaching him about sharing, but maybe we need to teach him about ownership first, about what it means to have something that is yours to give, not yours to be taken. I'm 62 years old. I own my time. I own my labor. And choosing to give it on terms that don't leave me empty is the final and most important lesson I can teach my family. The foundation holds because you maintain it. You check for cracks. You shore up the supports. And you never, ever let someone else's emergency become your permanent load. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt the quiet strain of unpaid care or the shock of family expectations, you're not alone. Share your experience in the comments. And for more deep dives into the hidden economies of our everyday lives, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I'm Robert Wright. Thanks for listening.